If you worked with some amazing people, from design to product to growth, from startups to large enterprises, you probably got to see how they've turned their ideas into innovations, their improvements to best practices, and create a repeatable winning formula. Hi, I'm Pradeep, and welcome to the Three Keys podcast, where I talk with creators, builders, growers, people that keep reinventing themselves. This podcast focuses on the lessons they've learned along the way and boil them down to three keys they credit for their success.
So if I want to get down to the most basic primal definition, design is so many things for so many people, right?
Yeah.
So in for people in creative individual expression freedom, that's different. They think of design differently. My wife is an architect, she thinks of design differently. For each person it's different. So for somebody in the enterprise space, in the software space, how do you define design?
Well, I mean, it's not a sexy way to define it, but really it is it's a tool, right? It's very simply a tool. We're not doing it because we love designing. All of my designers and video producers have their passion projects they do outside of work, but we are specifically here to create marketing material. We are specifically here to help sales do their job. We're specifically here to make certain awareness of our brand and its features and why it matters is clear. It's not here to do pretty things, as much as pretty things are an important part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's one of the things that I think is often a struggle in the corporate world, because you have many different asks from many different people, and they're coming in with their personalities and what I feel I love. This is the color that is my favorite. Can we just do that? Or I like this kind of music for a video, and there is the recentering conversation that has to happen quite often. What is the business objective of what we're creating? We're not just creating for the sake of it, and we're not creating to fill my soul with happiness that I create great art. At the same time, when we do a good job, it does fill my soul with happiness that we did a great job, because there's this great piece. And oftentimes a piece comes out and it's nothing like what you thought it was going to be, because every exec had their word. And as long as it functions, that's still okay. But it's definitely the scales of that.
I see the artwork behind you, and we've talked about this in the past.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes things come to you. Sometimes you start off with something like you just said, and it's nothing. The end product is nothing like you envision. How do you stick to? I don't want to say boundaries, but there's a defined parameter that you need to go with, right? So what's the business goal? What's the marketing goal? What are you trying to say at the end of the day? So within those parameters, how do you take what you're designing from its infancy in somebody's head through to completion? Like, what are some of the common hurdles that you see, right, where people get lost, where people could go down a rabbit hole? I've been guilty of that in the past.
Well, it's interesting because it's hard to divorce yourself of your own perspectives, right? We have product ABC that needs to be marketed, and I've got this idea that I see in my head, and now it's very colorful and it's very real and it's very emotional, and it triggers for me, and I now have to figure out how to make you feel the same thing. And I might be able to tell you this idea and you feel it and you go, great, let's develop it. I might tell you and you may not get it at all, and I might be frustrated that why doesn't he get it? He just doesn't get it, but it's amazing. And you can go down that rabbit hole of let's investigate this idea further, which is not a bad thing. I think being incredibly cognizant of our own perspectives, is a huge number one rule. I'm often asking my wife and others, okay, am I not overthinking this? Okay, am I steamrolling this person because I believe this way? And so I think for me, it's a lot of pitching. It's a lot of, I have this concept. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. That's where video calls come in really handy because my stakeholders are nowhere near me. And I will pitch it and I will watch their expression all the way through. And I'll notice where I need to pick up my story or slow it down a bit because, well, depending on the person, are you engaged? Are you not? Then from there, adding visuals to it and doing it all over again and seeing if it even sticks. Um, that's one of the number one things. But I mean, having a team of creatives around you that each have their own perspective to bring to something and all feel like they have the creative freedom and trust to play with things that aren't fearful that they're going to get shot down or pushed down because they had an idea that wasn't good is so powerful. It's interesting because there's probably a perfect number of the amount of creatives you want to have in your team, just enough to have enough crazy ideas, not too many that everyone's bored or adopts their own thing, and not too few that no one has any time to flex their creativity. I've been in those positions where you're just going, I just got to put food on this table over here. I can't think about making a masterpiece. And then, you know, it's the Don Draper thing. It's what Mad Men, right? He got to look at all of the designers' works and depict the few that he thought he could sell. And I think it came back down to, if you look at it from that perspective, it wasn't if it was a great idea, but it was if he could sell the idea. Because at the end of the day, he needed to make money on it, and the customer needed to want it. But that's I kind of went on a slight tangent with that, but that rabbit hole is super difficult not to get down. And the other thing too is knowing who are the right people to vet your idea. It's the same thing as any startup as well, right?
Yeah.
You need people who are incredibly objective, who are your worst critics, to look at it and vet it. And my wife's horrible for this because I have all these screenplay ideas and she just kills them because it doesn't fit with her ideology, but it makes me look at them a different way and go, okay, well, how would I pitch this to her to get her excited about it? You throw Hugh Jackman in, then she's excited about it and we're good.
I'd be excited.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case. That or The Rock, and she's like, okay, I like this movie. Yeah, sure. But no, I mean, I just constant pitching, constant looking at things from a different perspective, putting something down and not looking at it for 2 days, coming back to it, going, does it still hold up? Seeing if you can get your creative team to create some mock-ups for it, because they now have to interpret what you came up with to create a mock-up that tells the story. And that's where you start seeing the divides as well. Well, I pitched this idea, this is what I saw in my head, and that's what they came to. So something's missing. And I can't assume it's them. I have to assume it's me.
So for me, psychologically, I'm one of those guys that, you know, I have to ask 10 or 15 people for their opinion. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? So at some point, it's taken my wife, we've been married going on 17 years, and it's taken her this long to get me to stop, you know, asking for too many opinions.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's my rabbit hole.
And it doesn't mean that the people that you're pitching this to are right. Yeah. You can still get 17, 20 negative reviews from people you're pitching to, and you can still be right. It just means your pitch isn't refined. May mean your pitch isn't right. It may also be a horrible idea. But I mean, we have this issue where we will pitch something to an executive. This has happened at every company I've ever been at. And they'll take it home and show their husband, their wife, their friend, or someone that's a counterpart in another business. And that person will just kill it because of whatever reason. Because of, you know, that person's focused on another idea, another perspective that day, or doesn't believe in that marketing method. And the executive will come back and he'll kill it. And you're going, the executive loved it before they went and asked for advice. Stop letting them ask for advice. Again, they have to vet it themselves. And I think some of the best executives are the ones that don't assume that they know best. The folks that assume or believe that they've hired the right people for the right job, and they take a certain stock in what you say. still validate, but certain stuff.
Yeah.
Versus, well, I know best and I love this color. You're like, well, that color means death in 10 different countries, and you're going to put it up.
Yeah. So I'm starting to see two themes in your talk, but before I get into that, I have a quick question.
Sure.
You've talked about, team of creatives, and then where, there's not enough. I saw in one of the Twitter feeds yesterday, somebody posted about 5 or 6 different websites.
Okay.
Every single website looked the same.
Mm-hmm.
Same font, similar, anime, same background and whatnot. So for and all of them were startups, right? So for
Yeah.
startups where, maybe they may not even have a creative on the team. What's the, basic skeleton that they could go with, at least, if not an outcome, right? Just a skeleton of a thought, at least, that they could hang on to and say, I need to get these things out.
Yeah.
How could they work that in?
It's interesting. I mean, and that's a difficult spot to be in. I've worked with startups, and you've got multiple perspectives. I just need something online. I just need this information there. And then you've also got the other perspective. I need this thing that tells the world how amazing we are, right? And both end up falling short. And honestly, in many cases, you're not at a stage to be able to even be thinking in those terms. You in the middle ground is still difficult. And then, in a startup, you're a couple people, right? You're a handful of people. And to expect that any one person in that group has the creative spark that is going to give them a website that stands alone is a difficult and usually unrealistic perspective. I've also seen it, and you've probably seen this as well, where they put all this money and attention and time into building this amazing website, and yet the business is not getting the attention it needs to, or the product's not getting the attention it needs to, and it's such a difficult problem from that perspective. One thing I see a lot is you hire an agency to do it, and the agency grabs one of the websites out of the mothballs over here and says, "Here, it's a brand new. What do you think?" Boom, we'll put it up and we'll colorize it. We'll do all this stuff for you, and we'll charge you a bunch of maintenance fees for it. Honestly, I almost feel like, depending on which stage you're in, go get a Wix site or something like that, and then spend some money on some really good key art to go in there. Because really, people need to not have to learn a new interface. They need to not have to learn how to find the important information from you. They need the most straightforward communication system you can give them, which is your website. Straightforward, the menu's where it's supposed to be, the key points are where it's supposed to be, the about us, all of the how do I invest, all the things that you want them to know should be dead simple to find, number one. So do you need the most creative site ever? No. You need that, and you need a very clear statement that says, this is why we matter. And if you can get that statement, nice little key graphic that goes with it, anyone who is the right person is going to get it. And they're going to go, okay, early stage startup, they don't have, they're putting the focus on the product. Hopefully people think this through, right? Not everyone does. Some people, like myself, at times go, oh, this website's crap. I want nothing to do with them, and you move on. You can't do it all. You just can't do it all. There's nothing wrong with a simple website. There is everything wrong with poor messaging. If you can't get across why your brand matters, why your company, your solution matters in that bit of messaging, and then set it up in a way that the company can rally around and repeat, and not say, we're like this company, but we do that, and we have this other thing in the middle, and we have 10 other products we're building that don't exist, right?
Yeah, you want to be everything to everybody, right? Because and that's, I mean, that's another pitfall, where you go, I don't want to lose out on that segment of those customers. I don't want to lose out on this segment of the customers. I want to sell to this. I want to sell to that.
But if you look at some of the most successful companies out there, they picked one thing and they just did that. And it made it easy for sales to show up and do it. It made it easy for consumers to find it and utilize it. I mean, there's thousands of those success cases that do that then get to diversify once they have the audience. But yeah, I think actually messaging is more important than design at that stage. I hate to say it because I'm more of a designer, but the truth is, companies waste a lot of time and money on things that aren't creating the kind of movement it needs to. It's one of these funny things. I will see demand gen campaigns that look horrible. I would never want to take any credit for them, that have been done by A, B, or C, and they get out there and they're doing well. And you go, but this is it looks horrible. Who would click on this? Hey, it had a good bit of messaging, it had good targeting, and it went out there. So I mean, design is not the end all be all. It matters, but we have to put our egos in check and go, what's the business case?
Yeah. So there are two parts to messaging, right? You've touched upon the two themes that I wanted to bring up again in this question. But then let's look at messaging. There are two parts to it. One is, why are you doing it, right? You brought up the Madman example. He picked the designs that he could sell.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why the customers would buy. So there's the why aspect and there's the who aspect. Could you expand on that? Like, how does somebody drill down on the why? Because if I came to you and I said, Josh, I want to build this, campaign, right? Because I saw somebody else do it. I want it to look like this.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask me why, if my first answer is because it looks like this, I love the way this looked, somebody else did it, it's going to fail.
Yeah.
For people that want to create that, how do you propose they start thinking about the question why?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, actually. It's a really good question because we get that a lot. We want to look like this company, we want to do that kind of branding, or we see someone creating a piece of material and they start building taglines and just throwing them on. And it's because everyone, well, let me go back to something. I've worked in a lot of companies that are enterprise, or that are selling to enterprise. And there is a certain way of speaking, at least there used to be, and I think it's changing a lot in your branding. And it was this tone that they wanted to sell. And I had to keep reminding everyone, it says every person you're selling to buys a car, they go to the grocery store, they watch television, they see all the commercials on TV, they're all consumers. So keep that in mind when you're marketing to them, instead of just trying to say, this kind of person needs to hear this kind of message. Try to look at it in a way of how can we engage that person with a message that gives them the important things they need. But that is a sort of side tangent. So let's take an example. You've got an IT company and you come to me with an Apple advertisement and say, I want this for my company. Right?
That's happened so many times.
Right. And this is a very good contrast that we can play with. There are other contrasts that are much more fine that get difficult. I would sit down with you and say, okay, well, let's talk about who Apple's audience is, why they're doing this story and how it's communicating to them. And is that what you want to do? Doesn't mean it always gets through to the person. But you take, for example, the Apple Underdogs commercial series they did, and then they did their one from working from home. And it was super long, it was chaotic, it was fun, something we all related with. But what they have, regardless of what they're communicating, before you even get there, versus what you and your IT company or your little startup or your doohickey you've created is they have brand awareness. So they can pretty much do anything they want. Now, obviously, they're not going to do anything they want, but they know that we know who they are. So they can have some fun. Doesn't mean you can't have fun, but you have to be more clear with the fact that you are building awareness. So they're very different campaigns. They're very different concepts. They're also nebulous, right? Because we go, well, if I put that out there and people like it, they'll know me. Well, there's a big problem with coming away from a commercial and going, that great commercial with the giraffe. Oh, that was great. What was the brand? Who was the company? People often forget really great commercials, who they were advertising. If you look at Geico, everything is about Geico and their one message, saving 50, was it?
15
or more,
minutes.
whatever. Yeah.
It's catchy, right? And it hits home the point who they are.
It's all you hear over and over again. And they'll do something really cute, wrapped in their wrapper that's very clean and consistent. and they will spend a ridiculous amount of money making certain you see them consistently. Now, you, the doohickey company, doesn't have a ridiculous amount of money to make certain I see this commercial. I'm not being inundated the way Apple is, the way Amazon is, the way shoot, any of the big brands have the ability to inundate us daily with advertising. You, the doohickey brand, has enough money to run it maybe one straight week on one channel, maybe, but most people aren't even doing at that level, doing broadcast television. So now you put all this money into this commercial, and it's really great, and it's a branded thing, and it looks like an Apple commercial, and your audience didn't even see it because you don't have the money to put it in front of them. Did you spend your time wisely? Now, then there's the other perspective. Where are they going to see it, right? So let's take away the broadcast idea that Apple and the big companies are able to do, and let's say this video is just for your website. Great, okay. So realizing what's the path people got there. They didn't find it. They may have found it on YouTube. They might have found it on the website. How did you get them to that piece of content? And did you deliver on what you told them before they got to it? Right? And that question now comes down to what's the right style of storytelling for that? Is it better to have the preeminent expert on blah, blah, blah who uses your product or backs your product or likes it, get on camera and say, this is the most amazing thing since sliced bread, and I'm backing it because of these 3 reasons. You should take a look. Is that better, maybe, than having a fun, cute Apple commercial going on about how this thing's great? Probably, especially if you're an early stage startup, especially if you're early anything. You have no brand recognition. You have no trust yet with the audience. So that's some of the thinking that goes into that argument when someone shows up with, I want a viral video about blank. Viral doesn't really happen without lots of money.
Yeah. Even getting visitors to the website, right? Mm-hmm. How you design, you touched upon this, right? Just if you don't have money, pick Wix, have something out there. Like, why do you pick, a certain image? Like, what are you trying to convey?
Yeah.
Right. Are you trying to show, who you are, how you're different, how you can make life easy, for the visitor? So I think that piece of why I've realized that people don't ask it at every stage for every project, but they probably should.
Well, and that's where we want to educate the designers and the video producers and everyone else in the process, those who are taking in the project from the requesters, to think that way. And it doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen most of the time. And I think it takes a lot of time in this business to actually be able to ask that question correctly. You get the junior people asking it because they don't want to do the project. Well, why do you need this, right? And then you get the folks who have gone through all of those and they go, well, yeah, this project sucks, but I get why you need this. Let's see if we can make it a little bit more exciting by doing this, that, or the other thing, right? But yeah, no, you really need to go down that long rabbit hole of why are we even doing this? I have, in my freelance years, talked a lot of people out of doing videos. And that was my business. I was going to make money on this. But instead talked them into adjusting their website, building better messaging, creating better assets that they can use. But, again, there's just so much ego involved in what we create, right? There's this, I had one vendor he just loved the Mediterranean. And so he wanted everything to have those Mediterranean warm colors and the beaches, and remind him all. I'm like, had nothing to do with his business model. Had nothing to do with the audience he was going after. Actually, his audience was teenagers. I need bright pop colors that look like Disney.
Yeah. So what is good? So instead of saying, it's not what you're designing, it's what are you trying to say. So I think the question should always be around the message, right? What are you trying to say? Why are you trying to say it? Instead of what are you trying to make? What are you trying to produce? And why are you producing? So what are you trying to say? Why are you saying it? And the third piece, and you've touched upon this through the talk, the audience, so the who you're saying it to, right? How do you weave that into a discussion? Because when somebody starts thinking about, all right, I need to redesign the website, or I need to create a website, or I need to put something out, even if it's a webinar. I mean, we're going through webinar fatigue right now,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? But that doesn't stop this. I mean, it doesn't stop me from having to put out. And that's a question I keep asking. That's a question. Anything like my first thought, I go to Giselle and she's like, who, why, right? So
Yeah.
she keeps me. I have to be on my toes. But how do you propose? I mean, how do you tell people to think about the audience?
I mean,
Is
there's
it dependent on the medium, or is it dependent on the message, or dependent on who they are or what they're trying to do?
well, we usually just ask the blunt question, who's your audience? And then we drill down from there to how are they going to engage? What is your method of getting this out? Right. And if you're already in a big company that's got its own demand gen system, then it's already answered for you. But let's treat it like a freelance client, right? If that person comes to me and says, okay, I want this piece of material, great, who's your audience? Oh, 18 to 45. Okay, that's a really weird dynamic. Let's start talking about that dynamic. Why would someone who's 18 be purchasing this, and where do you think you're going to get to them at? Oh, well, okay, so we're doing the A, okay, and then this middle ground B, and then this middle ground C. Okay, we can divide that out. Oftentimes, we don't spend as much time breaking down the audience as we probably should, right? Oftentimes, people have a wish list of their audience versus actually something they've tested, something that they've gone, well, we looked at our analytics and we looked at our sales data, and this is what our audience is. And then trying to understand how they're getting there. But really, and that's not a question for me to answer, not a question for my design team to answer. It is a demand gen question, and it is a sales question, and it's one of those things they need to figure out how to answer. And it's something that we can kind of put off on them at times. But once we get those answers, or even part of those answers, really it is important that we sit down and go, okay, if I was this group, what are they looking at? What channels are they looking at? Let's go look at those channels and see what's on those. What would stand out within that and still be the same tone? We can use broadcast really simply and say, okay, they're looking at CNBC. Well, we know what CNBC kind of commercials are running. We know that it is news based on the stock market, based on business, based on simple factual responses. This happened and the market went this way. And then the commercials that are on there are talking at this audience in a certain way. Great. We can look at that and try and do something that breaks outside of that, if it's in that tone, because we now know your audience loves CNBC. But that's just one of the metrics. But that helps arm us with a way of approaching a commercial or website or anything else. And it's the responsibility of the customer to know this, to really, or hire someone to know this, to find this, but to really dig down into this. Designers shouldn't be making those kinds of decisions.
As I'm trying to promote this podcast, right? The three keys. I'm trying to build the ship as I sail it. And I realized that the way I position the podcast in LinkedIn, for example, has to be completely different from the way I do it on Twitter, right? So for startups that are trying to build or design content or messaging, when they look at the audience in one channel could be very well different from an audience in another channel. So do you propose then, how do you help them think, not to say how to help them pick a channel, but how do you help them think through deciding on a common thread that could fit across multiple channels, right? A simple messaging that could resonate in multiple channels, or one type of messaging that could really hit home in one channel. So you could go either way, right?
Right.
Depending on the budget or depending on how bold you are or where your audience primarily sits. So how do you help them think through it? I'm not saying you have to decide.
One thing I think a lot of us say is, if you can explain, if we're talking about messaging, if you can explain what your company does to your grandmother quickly and easily, you probably figured it out. And then from there, you can wordsmith it and make it a little bit sexier. But the problem ends up being that usually doesn't happen. It doesn't usually happen that way. It's rare that you find someone that, especially in the startup stage, comes up with a dead simple, clear way to explain what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's really the litmus test. Can I go to my folks and say, I'm doing this new thing and it does this, and what it's already doing is built inside of a foreign concept to them to begin with. Can I get that across in a much simpler term, right? Can I explain what Twitter is to my folks who have no interest in it? Explaining a hashtag to them was an interesting thing. I'm like, it's okay, let's start at something you guys do understand. You tag an image with a word that helps me find it, and then blah, blah, blah. So we've created this thing that optimizes hashtags. I'm just making up stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Being able to explain, being able to storytell, being able to watch your audience respond and adjust on the fly, all powerful skills. Not everyone has them. Not everyone should have to have them. I'm not saying do that, but that is one of those things. Watch your audience as you explain what you're doing. Constantly refine. But I think really spending some time in the storytelling side of things. It's the that startup had to go and pitch for investment. Oftentimes, not always, right? But
Yeah.
and they had to get that pitch down. They had to get it down in a simple term, but they were talking to a finance person, or sorry, a VC who's actually way more intelligent than your grandmother. Not more intelligent in that space than your grandmother. So they're still on that journey of continuing to refine that story down to this one thing. If you get it good enough, I think that your grandmother says, "Oh, I would love to use that product, but I have no use for it, but it sounds incredible." You might have something that works across many channels because it's easily understood.
Got it.
But yeah, there is definitely the other case to go, okay, we're going after the video gaming market, and we want to change the message for each type of gamer, from children to teens to adolescents. Well, if the simple story is still the same, and then we want to spunk it up a little bit with a couple words that fit with it with each of the audience, you can do that, and you should think about your channels. But yeah, if you're trying to cram in a piece of messaging into something simple that's not, you're gonna have trouble. I just say get to the point. I think that's the biggest thing. If you can get to the point right away, then from there you can massage it.
Cool. This is great. You gave me the, key is messaging, and you have to think about who, what, and why, right? So can you think of maybe an enterprise tech and or a startup that's doing this really well, that has been consistently doing this well?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I'm not really sure off the top of my head, and it's partially because I've not been doing research recently into that. I mean, we all have the brands that we like, that we say, oh, those are beautiful. And I think the thing on the opposite side of that question or answer is we need to look at where they started. Almost all of them have had long journeys to get to the brand that we recognize, to the recognition, to the style they have, to the art of their business. Apple didn't start out sexy. Microsoft definitely didn't start out that way. It still isn't. Depends on who you ask, though, but they're consistent.
Yeah.
Twitter started out simple and clear and easy and to the point. You could definitely say that there's that. I think a lot of the single source, single use products that started out that way, I think did a great job of that. I don't know what their branding looked like back then. I do remember hearing. I remember it was all word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can't really point to any one company that's like, this is the one that's doing it right. And again, a branding is never complete. It's never done. It's always growing. It's always changing.
Ongoing.
Yeah. The difficulty is building consistency, but yet flexibility to keep growing, which only some brands, I think, ever achieve that. And a lot of the ones that do have a lot of money to make it consistent. You look at some of the scale of companies like Cisco, like Apple, like Amazon. Amazon, from what I've seen, if I remember correctly, 'cause I used to work for a company that was a partner with them. they would change the design system regularly. And then you would have all of these leftovers that were stuck out in the world that were still representing the company. It's a brand is a difficult thing from that perspective, is building consistency, which makes it a little bit more difficult to be flexible sometimes too, or show up with something exciting.
Yeah.
So startups really
again, the conformity, right? You have to conform to what you're saying, and you have to play within those boundaries. Yeah.
It's difficult, right? Because you have a 1,000-person company and 1,000 people with different perspectives and things that they like. And, this person bought a Kia, or this person bought a Cadillac, this person bought a Mercedes, and each of those fit to their design aesthetics, which means that's going to roll into how they want to build their slides. Roll into how they want to use your messaging. It's going to roll into how they like or dislike what the company does with the website. But every single one of them are your brand ambassadors, and you really need to get them excited about your brand guides, which are probably pretty boring because you got to be consistent.
Yeah.
So brand is typically pretty boring when you really get down to, I think, the nuts and bolts of it. It's those key pieces of art that everyone gets excited about. But that's off on a tangent.
Josh, this has been great.